asked the U.S. to talk through. In the UN's report, they were really concerned about things like Guantanamo Bay, immigration detention, specifically healthcare. You had a lot around police issues, certainly. Specifically, police issues with what happened after Katrina, trying to get updates around that. You had a lot of concerns around tasers, a lot of concerns around there being a lack of federal oversight of police departments. And then also, though, really amazingly, the CPD specifically is called out. Other than New Orleans, as far as I remember, that is the only police department that's named specifically in the UN sort of questions to the US that they're expected to address. And this is because of the incredible organizing that was taking place around the John Birch torture cases, and folks like Joey Mogul, who's somewhere, going to the United Nations and doing what we're about to do now around John Birch. So there's room for us to really add on to that conversation, which is very exciting. So there are 8 of us that are going to be going to the United Nations, presenting our report, and trying to bring more attention from the committee to what we've raised. And so this is the original 6 of us. When we first set out, we just wanted to raise enough money to send as many as possible of these 6 people. And so we have Ethan Viet's family here, who I can't tell you how amazing that is. He is the person who I quoted at the very beginning who was friends with Damo, and he's getting to go, which is remarkable. I'll be going, Rick Wilson, Monica Trinidad, which is over here, Todd St. Hill, and Brianna Champion. We ended up having such an incredible response from the community. We raised, just online, we raised over $20,000 from over 370. And that's from folks all over the country. I think some people were international. There's like one really amazing one from a 5-year-old who saved up her allowance and made a donation to us. Like really, really amazing residents in the wider community. And we actually were able then to add 2 other incredible young people of color to our delegation. So we've got Asha Ransby and Malcolm London are also going to be going with us. So we'll be a total of 8, which is just really, really amazing. They're definitely going to notice us. Like that's. I want to break down another piece. So we're going right to the Committee Against Torture. So there's an important distinction to note. We're saying what's happening here is torture and cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. A lot of times sometimes those things get conflated. I even make that mistake. So here's the thing. Cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, the way I understand it, and there's not like a very specific line, it's definitely, there's some gray areas, but cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment causes severe physical or mental pain and is caused by public officials, right? The police causing severe physical and mental pain is cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. Torture is sort of the most severe cases of that, and it's not just being caused by a public official, but it's intentionally being inflicted, right? It's being done unlawfully, right? For prescribed purposes. So they're racist, right? That would be bad, and that's absolutely unlawful, right? So that's how we understand sort of the differences there, and we see both of those things happening, right? That there's absolutely torture taking place, and then an overwhelming amount of just cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. Now there's 17 or 16 articles in the convention, and we really highlighted 6 of them. So I'm not going to read through all of these. You can see them. They're really easy to find online. But I do want to just really quickly distill the most important pieces of these articles that we've touched on. So Article 2 basically says you have to prevent torture, right? You have to do that. And cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. So Article 10 says, okay, so you have to prevent it, and then also you have to have sufficient and adequate education and training systems in place at a federal level, so standards of education and training that adequately prevent torture, right? So you have to have a training system for your cops so that they aren't torturing people. We know that's not happening. Article 11, this one's really important. You have to have, the federal level Department of Justice needs to have systemic review of its police department. So standards for measuring and keeping track of what practices are in place, what data is being collected, how is that data being collected, what are the trends and patterns we see in that data. The federal level is supposed to be doing that, and they're not. Article 12 says that people who make a charge of torture against the government or a police officer are supposed to have the right to a prompt and impartial investigation, right? And then Article 13 says that, and if someone makes that complaint or charge, that there needs to be adequate systems in place to make sure that those folks are protected against any ill treatment or retaliation or intimidation. And then Article 14 says that if it's found that torture is taking place, that those individuals involved are due fair and adequate compensation. And this includes means for as full of rehabilitation as possible, right? So not necessarily just to check, but also, right, we know that when people are tortured, there's a lot of ongoing psychological issues. You need therapy, right? Folks might need job training. There's all different kinds of things that are involved in rehabilitation. So those are some of the articles that I just want to pull out really quickly. If it's not clear already, it's a complicated paper to write. You have to speak through those articles, right? Like make this legal argument, and you're trying to address. So here, UN, here's what you asked the U.S. to say. Here's the problems with how they responded to your questions, and here's new information in addition to what you've been talking about in the past that we're adding in now. And all of this is contained within this Human Rights Convention Against Torture framework. So with all of that, and you only have 15 pages. That was the other really tricky thing. So what we found, though, is that there are these really common, there's these specific themes of cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment and torture that young people are experiencing that I'm going to talk through the data in just a moment. So we've got harassment and abuse, use of excessive force, use of deadly force, sexual assault, mass arrest and detention, and then inaction and impunity. And that within this we find violations of Articles 2, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. So I want to start us off with talking through harassment and abuse. So in its past and current conversations with each other, the UN has called the U.S. out for harassing and abusing people, particularly racial minorities. And the U.S. has said, you're right, we're working on it, here's all the great progress that we've made. So there's this history of this being understood as a problem in the United States. And what we've done is with our report, we started with these testimonies to distill these themes, and then we were able to find data, right? We started looking, what's the data say? And it absolutely, of course, supported what young people have been saying for a really long time in this city. And so we see that there's this really, that not only is harassment and abuse taking place, but that it's happening that invasive and degrading harassment is happening at really alarming rates. We're seeing intimidation, we're seeing invasive and abusive searches, we're seeing theft of property, we're seeing verbal abuse. I have another testimony I want to bring up now from a young person that was shared at our hearing that we held in August. So this person said, we're sitting in a house playing video games and we hear a banging on the door. Before we know it, the door is kicked down and there's 5 special ops officers with their huge M16s drawn, pointed at us. 3 15-year-olds playing video games. And they tell us, get on the ground. They say, if you move, they're going to kill us. Don't look at me, we'll fucking kill you in a second. Pointing their guns at us, then they don't find anything. They let us all go, they laugh, try to joke with us, apologize, then leave out. And we're sitting there like, what just happened? They tear up the house, they stole money. So the thing about Chicago is that it's really hard for us to document sort of the daily grind of harassment that young people of color are experiencing in the city. I think a really common thing that people think of when they think of harassment is stop and frisk, right? And we know that happens in Chicago, right? You can walk through some neighborhoods and you're guaranteed to see several people, right, getting stopped and patted down. And I think New York offers a really exciting example of some of the ways that activists have worked to resist stop and frisk. But here in Chicago, the way that we document encounters between police and civilians doesn't allow us to actually figure out how much stop and frisk is happening. And this is for really complicated reasons of both being like over-inclusive of information and under-inclusive. Like they collect too much data and not enough. And it makes it really hard for us to show that harassment is a problem and stop and frisk is a problem, and particularly for people of color. So what I mean is that when the police have any encounter with just a regular person, right, and it doesn't lead to an arrest, they have to fill out something called a contact card. Now, an example of this is when you involuntarily stop someone and search them. That is just one of many different kinds of encounters that would be recorded on this piece of paper. However, the way that it works is you fill out, here's what happened, here's their name, and there's a description box. It doesn't explicitly ask you to indicate, was this person involuntarily stopped and frisked? So there's no way to figure out if it was a stop and frisk or some other kind of encounter. So we have this huge database of encounters, but we don't know how many of them are involuntary. And then if it leads to an arrest, we don't have a documentation system that determines whether or not they were arrested as a result of an involuntary stop and frisk. So it makes it really hard for us to show this. However, the ACLU of Illinois actually went through the CPD's database and used keyword searches. So they went through and they were able to be like, okay, so we can, if we look through all of the documents that have these keywords, we can tell these ones definitely someone was involuntarily stopped and searched. And looking at that, they can see, okay, absolutely within this, we're seeing a ton of really unlawful stop and searches, right? There were no grounds for this person to be stopped and searched. Now, another thing that we can look at is we can look at complaint records. So if you look at between 2002 and 2004, we know most people when something bad happens to them with the cops, like I can speak to this. I never, like I'm gonna go report this. Like I don't think anything's gonna happen. A lot of people are afraid to make a complaint, right? They're afraid of some kind of retaliation, or they don't know the process, right? I don't even know how to exactly go about making a complaint. So we know that it's a very small percentage of folks that actually do complain when something happens. And we see, between 2002 and 2004, we had 3,837 people say that they felt they were illegally searched by the CPD. Of all of those complaints, only 0.03% are sustained, meaning they have some kind of penalty given out. Only one out of those 3,837 complaints had any kind of meaningful penalty. And a meaningful penalty means that they get suspended for a week or more. Most penalties are just violation noted or reprimand, like slaps on the wrist. And I'll talk more about this impunity that we're seeing, it comes up a lot, right? So this is something that, there's a lot of different violations taking place, but I really want to point out Article 11, which says there needs to be a systemic federal level database, right? And standards for what kind of information is being collected, right? Like all police departments need to be able to show how many involuntary stops and searches are taking place. The U.S. has been called out on this repeatedly, and they just are refusing to do it. And we are going to make sure that they get called out again when